For all the latest community news and events.
103.2 Preston FM.
Your community, your radio.
And right now, nice to welcome my next guest to Galway's here in Penwortham this morning, and it's Catherine Newman. And Catherine is from the Archives in Preston. So, Catherine, a very good morning to you.
Good morning. It's a beautiful day.
It certainly is, and you also have come through passport control over the bridge to join us here this morning.
Well, I'm a naturalised citizen because I moved from the centre of Preston out to Penwortham last year, so they let me in.
So we are invading your territory then this morning.
Well, I'm not quite ready to commit that much. I've only been here 6 months, so I don't think they'll let me claim proper residency
Is that
yet,
right?
but I'm getting there.
Well, if you come out onto the streets, so to speak, this weekend for Penwortham Live, I'm sure you will be naturalised by Sunday evening.
I shall be there.
It's a brilliant, it's absolutely a brilliant weekend. I think it's £5 for the wristband that you can get from all the shops and other outlets here in Preston. And there's so much live music, poetry and prose. It's just a brilliant weekend. So there you are, a nice plug for Penwortham Live. So you're from the Archives in Preston. It always fascinates me, you know, when I look online and when Vicky comes into the studio and we talk about the Archives in Preston, it's just such a fascinating place. What I've not asked you is your title there.
I'm an archivist. I work alongside Vicky, who's spoken on the show before, and we work together on increasing information that's out there about what archives are, what they have to offer people, and what people can use them for. So the best part of my job really is coming out and about and talking to people and hearing their stories, but also telling them a few stories that they might uncover if they come into the Archives in Preston and do a little bit of digging on their own.
Right. And I mean, that is fascinating, because can I ask why you became an archivist and how? It sounds such an unusual job.
It was accidental.
Yes.
I did a degree in English and American Studies, which is one of these sort of loose, woolly degrees that people say, when you finish that, well, of course you're going to be a teacher, aren't you? But to be honest, I'm actually quite scared of children. And the problem is
understand.
They can smell fear. And once you've let them get the rule of you, you've got no chance. So I didn't really know what I was going to be doing, and I used to walk past the Archives on my way to university at UCLan every day, and it's a very distinctive building.
Yes.
Some people who are listening might know it as the weird grey building on stilts on Bow Lane.
That's right.
And it sits behind County Hall, which, as you know, is a beautiful red brick Victorian edifice, and then there's this strange little gremlin of a building that sits behind it. And one day it was raining, and I walked in, saw it was a public building, thought, well, I'll shelter from the rain, but I'll also find out what's in here. And I bumped into somebody who runs the volunteer group there, and they've had a very active volunteer group for the last 25 years. And I became embroiled in what we call will flattening.
Will flattening?
I know, it does what it says.
Yes.
The Archives holds over 300,000 wills and probate papers going back to the 16th century. And originally these were stored, rolled up into little bundles. So over the years, they became very dirty with all the soot that was in the offices where they were produced. And so a project was started many years ago to flatten out the little bundles and extract the information, who was the testator, what information was in there, where they came from, did they have a job, and the date, and create a much more usable collection of documents. And I started helping with this project, and I was hooked, absolutely hooked, because as you read through the documents to find out the information, you find all sorts of other snippets and clues and stories. And I think it's the stories that got me interested. Again, with a basis in English, I'm all about telling stories and finding out. So things like the wills are fantastic because they're one of the very few opportunities that ordinary people had a chance to leave a voice. it's not just the very rich that leave wills.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
It's the perception that the very rich are the ones that leave the wills, but actually it was part of what the Church of England considered to be, and this is a very strange phrase, a good death. It's in the Book of Common Prayer that was produced for local vicars to guide them in how to deal with their flocks. And the idea was that if you were close to death, or if you wanted to be prepared, you made arrangements with your local vicar that your soul should be left in good order, so you didn't have any pressing guilt or worries or woes. You also made arrangements that your body should be taken care of, usually to be buried in your local churchyard. And the third aspect of a good death was to make sure that all the things which you'd been fortunate enough to gain over your lifetime, all the physical items, the chattels, they call it, should be arranged to be handed on to those who want it in the manner to which you should decide. So that's where the idea of leaving a will comes in. One of the very good things about a lot of the wills that we hold is that they also include an inventory. And the inventory was created after the person died, and either friends, family, or a local clerk would go around and basically list everything they left behind, from their clothes down to their livestock if they were farmers. One of the best things we have, and I have started a little collection of these, is dunghills.
Yes.
In a farming area, a well-rotted dunghill is a thing of substance. It can, we've got them ranging up to about 12 shillings,
right,
which is a fair amount.
Yes.
So these inventories were created, and in the archives we have them for the titled families, the gentry. The biggest one we've got is 18 foot long.
18 foot long.
Yep. It's
yes.
a piece of parchment, and it comes in a big roll, almost like a Swiss roll. And when you unwrap it, if you unroll it across the table, it rolls all the way across the table and down the other side. It's 18 foot long.
Wow.
And it lists everything this woman owned: her jewellery, her clothes, her silver plate, her furniture. The other end of the spectrum is that we have an inventory that's 2 lines long.
Wow.
And all it says is his purse and his apparel. So it's what he had in his pocket and what he had on his back. But the point being that they still went through the paperwork. They still created that leaving trace. So we can now see 400 years later what this man had, which sadly for him wasn't very much. But for us, it's a fascinating story.
I mean, that really is fascinating. That, and I mean, I don't know why. I was just thinking, particularly with the last person you were talking about, that sadly these days sometimes we actually read, don't we, that someone has passed away and has been more or less destitute in life. Absolutely. With little to leave.
Yeah.
And though we are talking about, what year was that then?
That one would have been the middle of the 17th century.
The middle of the 17th. And what about the other one, the kind of parchment one that...
The very long, that was towards the end of the 17th century. That was a lady called Jane Townley, who lived at Townley Hall out towards Burnley, and she was the top of the social scale. So she had an awful lot to leave. But we have people who leave wills, and it's small individual personal items. So there's a chap called Miles Troughton who lived in the north of the county. He died in 1675, I think, from memory. And he wanted to make sure that his cousins got his best suit of clothes, his waistcoat and his riding breeches. But he left it to 2 cousins between them.
Wow.
Now, does that mean that one of them got the coat Monday, Wednesday to Friday, and the other one got it Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, and it had a day off on Sunday? Or did they split the outfit? It's interesting that clothes form an awful lot of the bequests made in probate documents because, of course, clothes and textiles, they were very, very important. It was good quality stuff. It's not like today where fashion's very much disposable.
And of course, I suppose that's also with the industry here in Lancashire, because we're talking when, 1675?
Yeah, end of the 17th century,
wow.
Beginning of the 18th, when a lot of cloth was produced in cottage industries, and it wasn't until later 18th century when those cottage industries started to be organised and brought together, which led into the Industrial Revolution that we have. But the quality of Lancashire cloth has always been incredibly high.
So clothes then would be just so valuable as these days, you know, if you were leaving clothes to someone, could you imagine possibly the response? But in those days...
I think knowing my nieces and the way fashion changes now, anything I had, they would look down on with deep disapproval unless they decided it had come back in fashion. But in those days, you imagine the amount of material in a man's riding coat, and fashions didn't change as much. They were more functional. So a man could inherit his grandfather's riding coat and still be wearing it and still be using it to hand on to his son when he died later on. They might just recut the pockets a little bit to bring it up into fashion.
Dear me.
But the quality still continued.
Wow. And... of course, this year being, World War I, the Great War. I mean, are you involved in anything particular at the moment through the archives?
Yes, we are. Quite interestingly, yesterday I was actually at the launch of a commemoration of the Preston Station Buffet, which was to do with the Preston Remembers project down on the station yesterday, which was a fantastic event. They had some ladies dressed up as the great and the good of Preston, who created the station buffet to support soldiers and sailors travelling through Preston on their way to or from the front. And it ran right through the war. I think at its height, they were saying they were serving over 3,000 men during a 24-hour period, just to give them a little bit of comfort and a little last taste of home in some cases. And
these, of course, were all volunteers, weren't they, who were down on the station?
They were. It's a very interesting mix of women, and it was very much a women's project. It started with some of the higher social class ladies, for example, Mrs. Astley Bell, who was the wife of the chap who became the Guild Mayor in 1922. My particular favourite is a lady called Beatrice Blackhurst, who was the wife of a solicitor who practised in Winkley Square. And she was one of these ladies who seems to have had a hand in all the charitable works, all the good causes around Preston for quite a long period of her life. And it spanned not only her involvement in the station buffet, but also she was very strongly involved in the suffrage movement. And this year being, this month being Women's History Month, it's really sparked an accord with me. She left behind a scrapbook, which we have in the archives, and it's something that holds a huge fascination because it covers not only family snaps and photographs of her children, and including the tail feathers of the first pheasant my Billy ever shot.
Wow. Yes,
marked 1913. So obviously her son Billy was quite a precocious little child. But she took part in some of the major suffrage efforts across the early 20th century to gain women the vote, which of course didn't happen until after the First World War.
Yes.
But she was involved right from 1908. She took part in what they called the Women's Pilgrimage, which was a walk in 1913 from all corners of Britain, converging on London for a huge rally and a ceremony, a church ceremony at St Paul's. In a way, she would call herself a suffragist rather than a suffragette. Suffragettes were the ones like Mrs. Emmeline Pankhurst, who was also local. She was from Manchester.
Yeah, of course.
But she was very much of the actions, not words school. She was part of the ones who chained themselves to railings, threw themselves under horses. That was the slightly more, should we call them vehement protesters?
Yeah, vocal.
Beatrice Blackhurst was part of a group run by a lady called Millicent Fawcett, who was again a local lady, and they wanted to pursue it through a political angle. They didn't want to be seen as hysterical females who could only get what they wanted by shouting. So again, it was quiet but concerted effort. They contacted as many local and national politicians as they could. They kept the subject high. Agreed that they would suspend all operations so that they could support and revisit women's suffrage after this terrible rape war had come to an end, and that's what they did, and they actually succeeded.
Catherine, thanks for again bringing history alive on Chat City. I could just talk forever. Just give the listeners the contact details, the web page where people can go to find out more about Lancashire Archives.
We're trialling a new website. The County Council, of whom we are part, have created a new website for us, so it would be very interesting to hear what your listeners have to say about that.
Right.
It's still the same address, lancashirearchives.gov.uk, and you can have a look. There's our catalogue on there, there's guides, there's our opening times, information about our upcoming events. Our next event is a talk on the evening of Tuesday the 9th of April, which is done by Heather Davis, who is part of the conservation team for Lancashire County Museums. A great expert on all sorts of things, but particularly for us, it's very exciting. She's talking about stained glass.
Right.
So that's a free event, and anyone can come along. No need to book. Just have a look at our website and see if those are interested. And do come along to the archives. We understand it's a strange place. We know it's not the sort of place that people think, oh, just pop in. But do. We're very welcoming, and there's so many stories to be found in there. It's just a matter of digging.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you for coming over to join us on Chat City here in Penwortham this morning, and I certainly look forward to another meet quite soon. And you're with Chat City, Preston FM 103.2, and whatever you do, don't let the sun catch you crying.
If you've got news, views or events you'd like to share with us and the Chat City team, why not give us an email? chatcity@preston.fm.